The Ford Everest is one of the best new vehicles that you can buy, if you believe all the awards that it's won. But what's it really like to live with? G'day, I'm Matt. This channel's called The Right Car, and the Ford Everest, which is the Ranger-based SUV, could be the right car for you if you're after something that's rugged and pretty practical. Stick around, I'm going to tell you all about it in this test. There are a few different takes on the Ford Everest theme, and it starts at a reasonable price point with the Ambiente model. That version, like a lot of the models in this lineup, is available with rear-wheel drive or four-wheel drive, so that might be perfect for you depending on what you're after. It does come with smaller alloy wheels than the rest of the range, still get LED lighting. The interior gets a smaller touchscreen media system as well, cloth trim too, and it's a 5-seater as standard. So if you want 7 seats in the base model, you have to pay an extra $1,000 or so. And the step up from 2-wheel drive to 4-wheel drive is $5,000 or thereabouts as well. And then there's this one here, which is the Trend. Now, I reckon it could be the value for money pick in this model range if you're okay with the 2-litre 4-cylinder bi-turbo engine. That's what it has as standard. There's a choice of rear-wheel drive or 4-wheel drive, and on the inside it is a bit nicer than the entry-level model. You get a bigger screen, you get leather accented seats, and there's the option of a premium seat package, which this model has, which adds heating for the front seats as well. Up from there is the Sport grade. Now, I reckon it's a fairly good option if you want either the 2-litre bi-turbo with rear-wheel drive or the 3-litre V6 with 4-wheel drive, because those are the two options there. It is a pretty good choice because it has a few nice features that you will appreciate, especially if you like big wheels. It's got 20s available or 18s with all-terrain tyres if that's what you want. And then there's the Wildtrak version, which comes with the Ute-derived orange paint colour. It looks fantastic if you ask me. And it also has the choice of 20-inch wheels or 18s with all-terrains. A sportier looking interior too. And I think it's going to be the right car for people who do want something that is a bit more showy, but still has plenty of go. It's a V6 only and 4-wheel drive only. And at the top of the range is the Platinum version. It's the Bling Fest if that's what you're after. It's got 21-inch wheels, matrix LED lights, and on the inside it does look and feel a little bit more special. It's got a bigger digital instrument cluster for the driver as well. So there is a pretty big spread when it comes to pricing for the Ford Everest, and obviously it's not going to be for all budgets. So what are the best alternatives to it? I'll tell you now. When it comes to the best rivals to this car, well, it's one of the best vehicles that you can buy in the segment that it plays in. But if you're shopping at the bottom end of the Everest range, then there are some good alternatives that you might want to have a look at. The first one is the Isuzu MU-X. It isn't necessarily as flashy or as fancy feeling, but it does have really good drivability, and it is pretty practical for the size of the car. It's a little bit smaller than the Everest, so it is packing a lot into a smaller footprint, and it costs less, so that might factor into your decisions. Now, if you're also looking for something that's very affordable, the Mitsubishi Pajero Sport might be a really good option for you. Hit the link at the top of the screen there and you'll be able to check out my review of that one. It is getting on a bit, and like the MU-X, it is a little bit smaller, so it might not be suitable for you, but it is still offering a lot of value for money if you ask me. And speaking of value for money, check out the SsangYong Rexton. You can hit the link at the top of the screen there and check out my review of that vehicle. I think it's fantastic value because, well, it feels more special than the other vehicles that you're paying the same sort of money for. And it has a 7-year warranty as well, which just adds to the niceness of that one. So it could be the right car for you. So it's just under 5 meters long. So it's not a small car, not a small SUV, but it is pretty practical. Look, this version has 7 seats, so it's got 3 rows. There are some models that have just 2 rows of seats, and they have a very practical boot. But let's have a look how practical the boot is for a 7-seat version of the Everest. Third row up, you'll see the figure on your screen now. That's not too bad. It's not as big as some of the other vehicles in this segment claim to offer, but there's definitely enough room there to put a couple of school bags or some shopping bags, maybe even a small pram folded up if you needed to. Now, one thing I like is that you can just pull these levers to lower the seats down, whereas in some of those other models you have to pull the tabs like on the side there, and they can fling forward, so it can be a little bit tedious. But as you can see, there's plenty of space in there for a week's worth of luggage for a family of 5. If you're not going to use the third row seats all the time, then you could maybe look at the entry-level version, which comes with 5 seats as standard. But hey, yeah, that's going to do the job for most people's needs. Oh, and also, if you're wondering where the spare is, it's underneath the body of the vehicle, as is the case with most of these big SUVs. I like the interior of the Ford Everest because it's got some really clever elements to it. It's really practical in terms of the storage on offer. So you've got a couple of big cup holders here. You would expect big cup holders from an American brand, right? There's a little storage slot in front of there, a wireless phone charger there as well, and a little tray there too. So that's a pretty practical space. And it's also where you'll find your drive mode controller, your 4-wheel drive controls as well. There's off-road mode buttons down here too. And this gear selector, I'll tell you more about that in the driving section. It's a bit of a pain. There's a covered center console bin here, pretty decent size as well. You've got bottle holders in the doors too. And one of my favorite features is the dual glove box. So you've got plenty of storage up front, and just like an MU-X, for instance, you do get pop-out cup holders on the edges there as well. So it is pretty practical. One thing that might take a little bit of getting used to is that the door handles aren't traditional door handles. They're little grabbers that you pull back towards you. Apparently that's a hark back to some 60s Falcon or something like that. And it doesn't feel very 60s in terms of the technology on offer in here though. It's got this big portrait style media system now. This is bigger than the entry-level version. I think there's a 2-inch difference between the two, but honestly, it's pretty easy to use and pretty easy to get your head around. And it also works really well when you're using Apple CarPlay or Android Auto as well. Look, there's lots of menus upon menus, but you do get used to it pretty quickly. There's a little button up here, like a home button, so you can just jump between navigation, for instance, or your Apple CarPlay if you've got it connected. There's a car button up here, so you can adjust the settings for the car. If you are going to be doing towing or off-roading or whatever, there's a bunch of different modes in there that you can choose. And also, I like the fact that you've got these manual controls for the air conditioning and a secondary bar there, so if you do want to touch screen those controls, you can for whatever reason. I like the screen. I like the digital instrument cluster for the driver as well. It's bigger than some of the others out there in this segment, and it's very easy to learn. It's not the most comprehensive or information heavy screen that you can get, but I think it's pretty good and pretty easy to get to terms with. So yeah, I think the front seat experience is really good. Let's check out the second row. Pretty good space in here for someone my size. I'm 182 centimeters or 6 foot tall. This seat is set for my driving position. My knees are a little bit close to the seat ahead, but not too close. I've got a fair amount of foot room, decent headroom as well, and you can fit 3 adults across the back. I have before. If you're wondering, you can fit ISOFIX seats in the window seats. So there's ISOFIX points here, and 3 top tethers in this row as well. So that's nice to see, and the accommodation is pretty accommodating. You've got a couple of vents in the ceiling here, so that is nice to see. There's a fan controller down here, so you can adjust the amount of air coming out of those vents as well. A couple of USB ports down there too, and you've got mat pockets on the seat backs, a flip down armrest with pop-out cup holders, and also bottle holders in the doors. So it's pretty accommodating. And then you can also adjust the seats with these rails. So if you need to give people in the next row a bit more room, you can do that pretty easily. You can do it on both sides too, so that's nice to see. All right, let me jump in the back and show you what it's like. Now, again, this seat is obviously the smaller portion, so that might be a consideration for you if you are, say, parking along a curbside and you don't want to move the big heavy side of the seat. Just keep that in mind. Let's just move this forward. So that doesn't do the best folding mechanism, doesn't completely fold or tumble or anything, but it's still easy enough to get into the back row for someone as big and clumsy as I am. Let's try folding this one forward and give you a bit more of a view. Yeah, so like, it's not great. It's not as good as an MU-X or something like that. There's not as much headroom, knee room, or width to the cabin. So it doesn't really feel like it's the best you can get in this segment. But like I said, you can slide these forward a little bit and give yourself just a little bit more space. Now, thing to note, there is a child seat anchor point in the back here, but you can't actually adjust these seats for, I guess, recline, which could be a bit of an issue because you feel like you're sitting quite upright as well. That's maybe why it feels like it's a lot more confined, let's say. Now, when it comes to the amenities in this back row, yep, you've got a couple of cup holders on the wheel arch toppers. They're those hard plastic things as well. And you do have big windows, so seeing out from in the third row is at least a nice plus. Like I mentioned, there's two engine options available in the Ford Everest lineup. The entry-level one is the 2-litre bi-turbo 4-cylinder engine. It's got heaps of power and torque. It's going to be enough engine for most people's needs, I reckon, and you can get it with rear-wheel drive or selectable 4-wheel drive. Comes as standard with a 10-speed automatic transmission as well. So it is a pretty compelling option, especially if you are buying a more budget-focused Ford Everest. But then, if you do have the money to spend, the V6 is a pretty fantastic engine. It's got more power and torque, as you would expect, still with a 10-speed automatic transmission and with selectable 4-wheel drive as standard. Now, they call it full-time 4-wheel drive. There's an auto mode as well, so it'll select between the different modes depending on what it thinks you need at that time. So the V6 does have a lot of reasons to choose it, but look, you tell me, which one would you pick? Before we go for a drive, I just want to call out that the shifter is a little bit annoying in this car. So it can feel like it's going to go into reverse and then it goes into park. And that can be really annoying, especially if you're doing like a 3-point turn or something like that. I just find it a little bit annoying. All right, other things that I should talk about while we're doing low speed driving. The camera system is really good. So you've got a reversing camera and surround view camera on this car. And that also means that you've got a really good view around the car, but you also get pretty decent usability for the modes for the camera. So there's different view modes, including a tow hitch camera mode, so you can see whether you're lined up to whatever you're towing, which is really good. In terms of the drive experience, vehicles in this range with the bi-turbo engine, I think, well, it's got enough power and torque to do the job for most people's needs. There's plenty of grunt available to you, and it's also pretty refined as well. It's a little bit noisy at times, and you most likely are going to notice that because the transmission is busy and it's always changing up and down gears. So you can hear the engine quite a bit more than you might expect. That's because there's 10 gears to play with, 10 forward gears, so it is a lot of gears to play with. And it's not afraid to do that. It will shift up and down quite a lot, but that just allows it to make better use of the torque available here. It's still 500 Newton meters, so it's punchy. And I've towed with this vehicle before, and if you do that, or if you just want to lock out some gears, you can select that through the shifter here. Basically, you just choose whether you want to have the transmission acting as a 6-speed or an 8-speed instead of a 10-speed, and then you won't have quite as much up and down shifting happening. There's also a 4A mode, so that means that you can hit the button there and it'll be in 4-wheel drive, and it'll use 4-wheel drive when it thinks it should, even on tarred surfaces, sealed surfaces like I'm driving on today. And it, you know, just basically means that you've got one less thing to be concerned about if you were going to encounter some slippery surfaces on the road below. Maybe you're driving up to the snow or something like that and you're worried about black ice, or you're doing a lot of traversing of different terrain and you're finding yourself going from sealed to unsealed. That might be a really good mode to have this vehicle in. Probably don't need to spend the extra on the V6 unless you really want the V6, and I can understand that. It does make things even more effortless, and it does have a really good amount of punch, that engine. The steering is one of the better elements of the Everest. It has really accurate and nicely weighted steering. It's quite light, but not too light. And it has a bit of feel to it as well. So you can sort of feel what's happening, which is nice. But it's also very, very manageable if you are dealing with urban situations. And it's, I would say, the best you can get for a body-on-frame ladder chassis SUV like this. I reckon the ride is also pretty much the best you can get for this type of vehicle as well. It is very, very comfortable, well controlled. firm but well controlled, and you will notice that the rear suspension does have a bit more of a firm attitude to it than the front does. So you might notice if you're going over a speed hump or something, the back of it can still jack up a little bit. Yeah, it's not unexpected, but it's also got a whole lot of four-wheel drive hardware that's built into the chassis and the underpinnings, so no surprises that it is a little bit firm, but it's certainly not rough, and it's also, I reckon, pretty enjoyable to drive in corners and stuff. So if you do like going for a drive, then you're gonna like driving the Everest. On your screen now, you'll see the official combined cycle fuel consumption figure for the 4x2 and 4x4 2-litre bi-turbo versions of the Everest. Yeah, so that's pretty good. If you can achieve that, good on you. But if you're wondering what I've seen over a week of testing in this particular bi-turbo trend model, 4x4, you'll see that on your screen now. And obviously it's a bit higher than the official claimed figure, but I was doing a fair bit of just urban driving for this week of testing. If you do lots of highway driving, you can expect it to be better. But if you are going to go off-road or towing, the numbers are going to be a lot higher. So just keep that in mind. And if you are wondering, the V6 version of this car has a higher official combined cycle figure. On screen, you'll see it there now. And I've seen in real world driving that it's not really that achievable. No matter what sort of driving you're doing, I have seen in the past that you're going to see a bit higher than that claimed number. So yeah, it's a bit thirstier, but you've got to be okay with that if you're willing to choose the V6 over the 4-cylinder. The Everest scored the maximum 5-star ANCAP safety rating in 2022, so it's got all the good stuff you would expect, including autonomous emergency braking with pedestrian, cyclist and junction detection. So that means it'll stop you from darting in front of oncoming traffic if it doesn't think that you'll make the gap. And it's also got active lane keeping assistance and lane departure warning. There's also blind spot monitoring and rear cross traffic alert. And it's also got a rear AEB system which will brake for obstacles too. So if it thinks you're going to hit something, it'll jam on the brakes for you. When it comes to parking stuff, you've got front and rear parking sensors on all grades and a reversing camera as well. But if you choose the top spec model, you get a surround view camera system, which is optional on some of the lower grades as well. It does make this a lot easier to park. So if that's what you need, it's a pretty good thing to have. There's also adaptive cruise control with speed sign recognition, and you can adjust the speed, the set speed, by hitting a button on the steering wheel and it'll drop the speed for you, or it'll adaptively do it for you if it thinks that it knows those speed signs well enough. I don't think that it does, because sometimes it gets it wrong. But when it comes to airbag coverage, it's pretty well covered. You've got dual front, front side, you've also got driver's knee, front center, and full length curtain coverage as well. So yeah, there's a lot of airbag coverage on the inside of this car. In Australia, Ford offers a 5-year unlimited kilometre warranty, which is on par with the mainstream brands. There's also a cap price servicing plan, and the first 4 services for the Everest are just $329 per service, which is pretty good. Now, there's also roadside assist available for this model and for all Ford models as well. You'll see the details down the bottom there. So I reckon it seems like a pretty good vehicle to own, but hey, the last generation Everest and Ranger that it was based on didn't have the greatest reputation. Let me know if you've had any issues with yours in the comments. It is so easy to see why the Ford Everest has won so many awards, because it's an excellent SUV. If you are going to go off-roading or towing, I recommend it. It's one of the best at those sorts of things, if that's what you're after. But even as just a vehicle to live with on a day-to-day basis for a family, this is a really good option. I wouldn't have it in black and I wouldn't have the trend model, but tell me which version you would pick and what color as well. Let me know in the comments section below. Could you live with the 4-cylinder or would you go for the V6? I'd love to hear from you. If you haven't already, please do hit like and subscribe and ring the bell to keep up to date with all of my videos. More coming. See you soon.